Welcome, everyone. Just to let you know, this is an open session. Now, I want to take a moment to talk about this blank canvas before you. What if you were tasked with drawing a prolific landscape on it?
Or filling it with unique character designs. Where would you even begin?
Would you know what to do right away? Would you be paralyzed by endless options or a lack of direction?
This is the curse of the blank canvas.
When we originally thought of what we wanted to speak about, we called it the myth, but we realize now that it's really a curse.
And that's what we're going to help you overcome. But first, why don't we introduce ourselves? Gargi?
I'd love to. I'm Gargi Roy, and I'm proud to say that I studied at the FZD School of Design, as well as taking mentorships from some of the world's greatest concept art masters. I've worked for Dhruva Interactive, Rockstar Games, and now Sumo Digital as a concept artist.
Very impressive, Gargi. I'm mostly impressed with your pronunciation of Duvra. Duvra? That's a toughie. Anyway, I'm Stephen Gibson. I studied at Humber College in Toronto, worked as an illustrator, graphic designer, and art director for clothing, books, board games, until I came over here to England as the associate art director at the Newcastle studio. And apologies if you see me with my hands flailing about. I talk a lot with my hands. I think Gargi does too. I'm not having a meltdown, and I swear there is no bee.
Of course. And some of what we're going to say today is scripted and some is not. However, all of Steven's jokes are 100% improv, and he definitely didn't spend hours coming up with them. Is that how you wanted me to read it, Steven?
What? Yeah, let's move on, you silly goose. Anyway, here are the four main points that we believe will help you conquer the curse of the blank canvas: mental prep, quick starts, square peg, square hole, and exit strategy. As we go through this presentation, Gargi will be focusing on environments and I, characters.
So, mental prep is all about purpose and preparing for the end goal. We need to have a set plan, efficiently gather and organize our refs, and find our unique design language.
Um, aren't you forgetting something?
Right. If you becaught a plan, you plan to becaw.
And don't you forget it. But I'm pretty sure the saying is if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. But I do like your chicken version more, Gargi, I gotta say.
Well, I think everyone knows who wrote that joke.
Eh, I don't know about that. Anyway, let's not get distracted. Mental prep is about picking a purpose and preparing. So tell us how you start, Gargi. What are you focusing on first?
So, I'm going to focus on a personal project of mine to illustrate how to overcome the curse. In this case, it'll be my project, The Alchemist, in which I had two primary goals. One was to improve my design skills, the second, to create more portfolio pieces.
Very cool. I like it. Now, what goes into planning for something like that?
I truly believe that planning is as important as execution. The more thoroughly we plan, the better our chances are at succeeding. I often find it useful to use existing IPs as inspiration for my projects. It allows us to create design constraints as we formulate our storyline. In The Alchemist, for instance, I used Kiki's delivery service for inspiration to create the primary plot. Once we have a rough idea of our storyline, we can then move on to listing out a set of possible characters, environments, and props that we would want to create for the project to come to life.
You know, I love me some Kiki's delivery service, and I agree. Planning is crucial, but so is ref gathering. How do you do it? What's your process?
So I primarily use Pinterest to gather a bulk of references to start with. I then organize all of my references into clear categories, either in a Miro board or in a pure ref. In The Alchemist, one of the prime locations I was starting off with was her workshop. So I narrowed down the different categories of references that I needed. Broadly speaking, the architectural style, different sets of refs for interior exterior settings, set dressing refs, workshop furniture references, any additional interesting elements, mood style guide references, and finally, my design language.
Right. So, and finding your design language can be kind of tricky. Why don't you tell everyone what we mean by finding a unique design language, and then maybe talk to us about this Dreamcatcher image you have here?
Of course. So, what do we mean when we say design language? A design language is a form, pattern, or style that unifies the various different elements in our world props, characters, environments, all alike. A unique design language not only creates a sense of coherence in your project, but it also helps you flesh out your storyline further and aid the narrative flow. I chose the Dreamcatcher as my design language for this project, not only because it speaks to me personally, but also it echoes the shape of Art Nouveau and French medieval architecture, which was the primary architecture style for this project. The Dreamcatcher also, incidentally, helped me visualize the alchemist capturing creatures from another dimension to extract fluids and craft potions.
That's a cool idea. Also, a cruel idea, but I dig it. So, yeah.
Thank you. It's your turn now, Stephen. Tell us about how you start off your mental prep. What's this cover we're seeing?
Absolutely. As an example, I'm going to use some client work that I did. I had made two covers already for the Black Badge book series, and they commissioned me to make the third. So, my purpose was to make the final cover, have it feel in line with the other two while being distinct in and of itself. And then, of course, the goal was to make as much money for candy as possible, or, paying bills or something like that.
Definitely candy money, I think. But let's get back on track. How did you go about planning for all this?
Well, when it comes to planning, I make sure the client and I agree on what the requirements of the image are, which characters, the mood, the layout. Then I do my best to sketch that out and write out the plan. I do some back and forth with the client until we're both happy with it.
Very nice. And then it's time to gather references, right?
Yep. Once the plan is set, it's time to do the old ref gather routine. So for photo bashing, I use the usual sources, just like you and probably everyone else: Google, Pinterest, free photo repositories, and purchasing content. I go wherever I need to find the right images according to my plan. I'll organize it all into very specific folders so I know where to look when the time comes.
And do you do anything special for picking out the unique design language?
Yeah, well, for this particular client work, the design language was easy. I was going to continue with what was established on the other two covers, which was specifically requested to be my own Grimslinger style, which is from a game that I made and published a few years earlier.
I really love the Grimslinger style. It's so cool.
Yeah, thanks. I didn't make you say that at all. It's definitely not written in the script. It's a lot of grime, frayed cloth, layers, dust, and slightly stylized photorealism. Lots and lots of rim lighting. Proud of it.
Very cool. Very cool indeed. I love it.
So, moving on, now that we've got our mental prep out of the way, the main cure, really, for the curse of the blank canvas is to simply not start with a blank canvas. Utilizing templates, photo bashing, and creative cheats, we can create the foundations of our images quickly. But keep in mind, this stage is all about broad strokes and not getting lost in the thick of thin things.
Yes, remember, do not start from scratch.
So, Gargi, it looks like you're doing a sort of 2D kit bash here as your quick start.
Yes. So there's a lot of ways to not start from scratch, but I generally cut out design elements from references I find interesting to then bash them together and have a solid base to start from.
So once you've got your kit sorted, it's time to start penning over, right?
Yes, in the next stage, I would start bashing images together with a rough paint over while focusing on big shapes and the main silhouette. Having a solid color layer clipped to your design layer will help you keep a check on your main silhouette without having to get lost in details.
And then how do you incorporate line work into all of this?
So I often prefer to use some line works, absolutely, to flesh out the basic details of my design. I generally use the glowing edges filter, then reverse the values to have a basic line work before I start making changes and adding details, mainly to speed up the process.
Right, clever. Um, that's a nice way to get some quick line work done. What do you do to finish up your quick start then?
Right. So, with the help of the generated line work on top of the rough paint over, I can now start to refine the line work and add details. In this stage, I'll mainly focus on the balance of big, medium, and small shapes, the form language, and a varied distribution of details.
Yeah, thinking of big, medium, and small shapes is great advice for everyone.
So, tell us about your quick starts. What are we seeing with your templates GIF here?
Well, I love a good template, and in this GIF, you can see I have a basic mail template that I use to springboard several designs off of. That basic template was actually just me tracing over a character I generated from an MMO character creator. I sketched over it, then liquefied it and refined the anatomy until I was happy with the stylization and pose. This is an aspect of cheating, air quotes, in case you weren't watching me, that I'll speak about in a moment.
That's a good way to not start with a blank canvas. I really like it. And next you're going to tell us about how you go with photo bashing. I'm curious to hear how you approach it.
Bashing is such a great way to block in an image quickly, as you know. You'll see in this GIF, which isn't showing all my steps, by the way, that I bash in different arms, faces, and clothing from various images. I'll worry about making it all work together later. I like to remove the colors so that it's one less thing to worry about at this stage. Since I mostly worked as an illustrator making public facing images, my goal later on will be to make sure the bashing isn't obvious. I'll maintain that photorealistic feel while making the images their own. If you look closely, the woman's face changes quite drastically throughout the process.
Yeah, it does change quite a bit, but that's very cool to see. You mentioned earlier about telling us something more about cheating.
Yeah, so I had used an MMO creator to help create the anatomy and posing I liked for my template. There are plenty of tools out there to use, such as Art Pose Pro, which you're seeing here on the screen, which isn't something I use all the time, but I have used it. The point here really is if you're trying to speed things up or simply don't enjoy the starting stages, like myself, there are resources out there to help. I love designing characters, but with struggling with anatomy, not so much. Though obviously, you should eat your veggies and practice the fundamentals as much as possible. As an artist with actual ADHD, it helped me to use tools that get me to the parts I enjoy quicker. But, that's me. Figure out what works best for you.
That's really great. I completely agree. So, as we move on from broad strokes to finer details, it's crucial to use the right tools. This phase of the process is all about refining your design, how to use 3D more efficiently, and design hacks in Photoshop for faster results.
It's all about using the right tools, folks. And speaking of tools, Gargi, that didn't come out right. But what you've got quick tools here. What is that about? I've never used them before.
It's a Blender plugin, very handy. So, when translating my designs into 3D, I use a lot of dirty modeling techniques with quick tools. For assets, I have to design from scratch. For generic assets, I usually download from resources like Sketchfab and kitbash these assets together to create a new design. Sometimes I also combine quick tools and kitbashing for my hero props.
That's pretty cool. That's a nice tool to have. Um, but it can often be overwhelming for people, new to landscapes to think about all the props and all the details that they have to do in a scene to compose it. What tips might you have for those feeling that way?
You're absolutely right. It can often be so overwhelming for beginners to start designing or even think about designing an entire location. In these instances, I always tell them to start small. Therefore, what's better than to start with a prop? For instance, if we think about the alchemist, we can always start small by starting to design the alchemist's workstation, for instance. I find it very useful to use outlines and shadows in the viewport shading in Blender to chalk out my design. We can then take a high-res render of the viewport image, take it to Photoshop, and finish off the designs.
That's great. I hope that's very helpful for some people. I'm sure it will be. And then, what do you do to finish up this square peg stage?
Right. So once we've assembled all of our assets and we have a ready solid base, we can extract the line work and start refining our design. It's important to be rough and quick while ironing out set dressing details and working out the narrative. Visual cues for storytelling is a very important aspect of environment concept art in general, like as you can see here, cracks on the floor, spilled liquid, overall mess, the creature capture portal with cages in front of it. All of this reinforces the storyline and draws the viewer's curiosity. It is also crucial to reevaluate your design at this stage over and over again. I tend to pause every now and then to give myself notes to see if I can make the design better. If you're stuck somewhere, it's best to go back to your references or even find new ones to make sure that the design is functional and the flow of the story is in order.
So, we need to be double checking our work to make sure we're staying on course, right? That's smart. I like it.
Thank you, Stephen. So, what are some of your square pegs?
As stated earlier, this stage is about moving away from broad strokes to finer details. Now, I'll start melding my bashed images together by painting over them, making sure their contrast and values match, and adding in missing detail. I usually reduce detail in photo bashed images with a filter in order to mimic a more painterly kind of look, force myself to paint in my own textures.
That's a very interesting tip. Looks like you use 3D assets as well. Tell me about that.
Yeah, definitely. So what you're seeing here, the gun in the holster is actually a 3D asset that I purchased. I did that because I had tried drawing it myself and failed miserably. So, sometimes you just can't sort out the right angle and design at the same time. And that's why 3D is so great for this sort of thing. I'll often use 3D for things like cowboy hats, which seriously, those are kind of hard to draw for me. I don't know if I'm the only one that feels that way, but they're tricky. And other objects I want as part of my character design, I'll do in 3D as well sometimes. So, just as a note, though, if I do use 3D, I often make sure to paint in some imperfections, wobble a line, adjust the perspective to be ever so slightly incorrect. Imperfections help it feel a little more hand drawn.
I completely agree. Small imperfections do help sell the hand-drawn feel. What about brushes? Are you sticking with the standard round or do you have some fancy ones?
Oh, I got some fancy ones, Gargi. While most or all of your painting can be accomplished with the standard round brush, the right custom brush can make a huge difference. Cloud brushes, hair, skin, that sort of thing. Don't underestimate the usefulness of a good custom brush.
Ooh, I'll have to steal some of those off you sometime. So you've got a specific set of brushes for specific tasks to help you in this stage. What about your Photoshop secrets?
Well, I do have a few, but let me just say I use Photoshop, but I'm sure there are plenty of handy hacks in other programs as well. Things like line smoothing, layer styles, liquify, and filters. For instance, this green energy effect in the image was accomplished using layer styles and the smudge tool.
Right. It's important to learn the specific features of a program you're using. They've got a lot of things built in there to help you with your workflow.
Yeah, totally. Some of these programs, like Photoshop, are massive with a wealth, not with a wealth, well, with a wealth, but a million ways to do the same thing, which is why it's so important for us artists to share what we've discovered with each other.
Very true. I love learning how other artists work and what different kinds of tools they use.
Yeah, totally. Anyway, it's enough already. In in this final stage for curing the curse, it's time to get your mind right, which I clearly don't. Focus on what matters and have some good tricks on hand for tying your image together.
Know when to call it done by identifying good enough.
So now for your exit strategy, you have find your camera as part of it. I'm curious why.
So, one of the primary steps in getting a production shot like this ready is finding the right camera angle that enhances the main design elements in your painting. Having a primary focal point and a few more that lead to it is ideal for a successful painting. I call it the one, two, threes of a composition. There could also be a 4, 5, 6. I also try to ensure that I have a good balance of big, medium, and small shapes when creating the final composition.
So find your focal point and balance the composition around it. Nice. Uh, Now that we know where we're focusing, it's time to fill in the details, right?
Absolutely. And this is one of my favorite parts, materials, lighting, and mood. I generally start off by adding some basic colors and a few variety of lights, spot points and area to create a standard mood. I use resources like Quixel Bridge for adding realistic materials. I then tend to go back to my mood guide and choose a few images that form what I call my color lighting palette. And then I try to implement this palette onto my scene as best as possible, creating points of interest and highlighting silhouettes where necessary. I also take screenshots of my 3D scene at times and do a quick paint over to plan my painting before I actually start. I go back to my 3D scene once again, one final time to adjust the lighting according to my paint over, and then I'm ready to take a render.
Okay, so once you've got that render, what do you do with it?
So once I have the rendered image in Photoshop, my primary focus is to always add details to the focal point first and then work my way outwards. It's also crucial to add elements that will take away the 3D feel and bring more life to the environment. For instance, adding smoke, imperfections to surfaces, cobwebs, scratches on the furniture, cracks on the floor, for instance, were great ways to introduce that in this painting.
Yeah, it really adds like a lived-in kind of feel to it. I like to think of it as adding the soul to the painting, or life as you put it.
Of course, and the right brushes are always very crucial in that regard as we paint detail and create a material feel in our paintings. I have an array of texture brushes, soft brushes, some with a bit of grain, different kinds of shape brushes, all help to speed up my painting process.
You know, Gargi, I love the smell of a good digital brush in the morning. That has no smell because it's digital.
Okay, Stephen. Anyway, lastly, the one thing I've recently learned from you, aside from how to write killer jokes, is to add that final punch to your painting using the camera raw filter. It helps to create noise, add more texture grain, clarity, add bounce light with the vignette feature tool, together with a few overlays to enhance the lighting and have that final stab at your painting before calling it done.
Yeah, the camera raw filter is awesome. A very powerful tool.
So, Steven, what's your exit strategy? When it's time to finish up, what are you thinking about?
One of the main things I try to keep in mind is this. Everything we do has a time cost. If I'm doing client work, generally, the longer I spend on it, the less money I make. So, and then also when you're doing studio work, the longer you spend on something, the less time you have to spend on something else. Which I know that sounds really obvious, but we often do spend time doing things that will make little to no difference in the final product. It's the perfectionist in all of us, but we do need to overcome that, even if just a little bit. Perfection is the enemy of progress, as Winston Churchill once wisely said. If you look at this GIF, it's an illustration that will be on, I mean, it's going to be going on a 2.5 by 3.5-inch card for a physical board game. So, regular playing card. You can see when it's zoomed in that the details are actually very loose, and that's because it's going on a small card where you'll never notice that lack of detail, and the printer itself can't even print that much detail. So, don't waste time on it.
Yeah, totally right. It's important not to push pixels around, as I like to say. Don't spend time on things people won't even notice or see. But I'm sure color and lighting is definitely worth the time cost. Tell us what this means in your exit strategy.
Well, yeah, I agree. It is worth the time cost. When doing my photo bash style, I'll leave the color and the scene specific lighting to the end. Now, in this phase, I'll add in the color, refine my light sources, work in the right shadows, highlights, and rim lights. You gotta have that rim lighting.
Yeah, we get it, Steven. You love rim lighting. I'm curious about your filters and overlays. This is something I've been impressed by when working with you.
Wow, thank you. I love the end of a painting because that's when you get to see everything kind of pull together and it starts to look like not poo poo, at least, for me. I have a lot of specific overlays and filters I'll use to finalize an image and color correct it. Dirt, grime, overlays, debris, color gradients, noise, you name it. It's all a great way to pull your color and lighting composition together. One such tool is the camera raw filter that you mentioned earlier. It's a great way to fix your contrast and colors, and unifying the image together.
I absolutely love the camera raw filter. It's such a gem I hadn't noticed. So, on to the final point of your exit strategy, and our final point for this SDC talk methodology. What's this about?
Well, aside from being a difficult word to pronounce quickly, methodology is, yeah, here I'm meaning to kind of encapsulate and close out our thoughts on the curse of the blank canvas. So, today we've presented our own specific methodologies for curing the curse, but of course, there are many more, and every artist will develop their own. The point, however, is that you need to develop a methodology, establish your process, and then refine it over time. As you can see in the GIF, it goes through a different process than I do in my photo bashing style. In photo bashing, well, I leave color, usually to the last thing that I do. But when doing a more line art style, it's actually one of the first things I do. So just figure out what works for you and, most importantly, what works for what you're doing. Promise, I promise you'll be a stronger artist for doing so.
Thank you, Stephen. And absolutely, knowing your workflow is crucial. This is a journey, and we're all figuring it out together.
Absolutely. So, before we finish our presentation, we just want to take a moment to call out a few resources we've mentioned and use.
So the first one would be Sketchfab. It's an amazing platform for getting 3D assets. Just make sure you're aware of the terms of use and fair use policy. Then Quick Tools by Jama and Alex is something I use extensively for dirty modeling. It allows you to get the feeling of drawing in a 3D space, just suits us artists better. Quixel Bridge is a great Epic Games platform for getting high quality materials, models, megascans to build a 3D scene. It's completely free, so go check it out today.
Yeah, and then Dan Levisi's brush set. So I'm not saying this is the brush set to rule all brush sets. This is the brush set that I used when I was starting out, and I've just added to it over time. I do think it's great, and there's a lot of good tools in there. But go and look for good brush sets, ones that relate to what you're doing, whether that's cartooning or watercolor or whatever it is. They do make a massive difference. And then the Met Open Access is just a great place to get a lot of public domain images to use for photo bashing. There are other resources on the web too. So just, I just want you to be aware that that exists for you and it's a good thing to use.
So, just to summarize our talk and go over the key takeaways, remember the four cures for the curse of the blank canvas.
Mental prep, purpose and preparation, quick starts, don't start from scratch, square peg, square hole, use the right tools, exit strategy, identify good enough. Yeah.
So, thank you so much, everyone, for listening in. Please be sure to reach out to us if you'd like to, and we are available to take questions now.
Yeah, we appreciate you taking the time to listen. Thank you so much. We'll have our live Q&A session now for the remainder of the time.
Thanks everyone for watching our stream, and we're going to do our live Q&A now. It's going to be super smooth and well refined and not totally off the cuff. You know how me and Gargi roll. We've got 2 questions, both from James. So thanks, James, for submitting those. If anyone has any other ones, post them in the chat or submit them, and we'll get to them. Gargi, you want to take us away?
Yeah, yes, absolutely. So I can see the first question we have here from James. Thanks, James, again for your questions. So the first one is kind of a blank canvas in reverse question. Have you ever had something that is very defined or highly detailed and been asked to strip it back to be more generic? What would be your process for taking that first brushstroke? Do you want to answer that for the character bit, Stephen, then?
Yeah. I think there are a few ways to take the question, but I will approach it more from the art director sense, where sometimes an artist will over detail, um, because they're having fun or whatever. And usually the process of stripping it back, when I go to like show them my draw over, is just like often I'll use like the smoothing brush to like just smooth out details and just um, sometimes I'll just do like a quick round brush paint over to just be like, look, and it'll be bad because the artist will refine it after, but it'll just be like blocking out, like you could just have like this color here and just like cut it all out, because really that character you just need to focus on the bold shapes, the bigger shapes, and when you cut up those big bold shapes too much, it starts to lose its boldness. So it does happen quite a bit for me to have to simplify things, actually. Gargi, how would you approach it for landscapes?
Right. So I think it would depend a little bit on the specific of what kind of simplicity we are aiming for here. For instance, if I wanted to take a highly detailed image and say render it in like a simple color wash line work kind of style, I would use a few shortcuts, a few tricks, let's say. For instance, I'd use the cutout filter in Photoshop to just simplify details, and then maybe a smart blur on top. And we could even use the glowing edges filter that I mentioned in the talk to get some line work on top. And then I would start, physically painting over with simpler brushes. It would again depend on the kind of style I'm aiming for. If it's more like let's say if it's like a Studio Ghibli-ish style, then some specific set of brushes. If it's like absolutely flat color line work, then just a round brush and a crisp brush for line work. So yeah, you can go further into details accordingly. So that's that. And then let's go on to our next question, which is, do you have any specific instances of a blank canvas crisis that actually turned out amazing? And conversely, is there one that you hated? Did you do anything differently, change your approach afterwards?
That's a good question that I wish I had thought of more before you asked it. I mean, honestly, for me, most of, I mean, as organized as I tried to present myself on that stream, it's I don't always remember to follow my own process. So there'll come a times where I'm just like, or what you had planned doesn't work out, right? Like you had done a quick sketch, and sometimes sketches are, very loose, and then when you go to actually detail it, you're like, it's not working out, and then you're trying to figure out what the heck to do to fix it. And so there's a lot of times where I will try things and they won't work, and so I have to try just other stuff. But in the end, uh, through the struggle, you eventually get somewhere that you can tolerate. And then sometimes you'll pivot the painting in a way that you weren't expecting, and it's cool. A lot of my Grimslinger's art, um, like the chicken that was on there, I was just like, wouldn't it be funny if I did a chicken? and and I didn't really have much of a plan, um, other than I had a picture of a chicken, and just went with that. And that one is one where I put like very little time into it, and ended up being one of my most liked and like purchased posters for me. What about you, Gargi?
Yeah, I completely agree with that, Stephen. Like sometimes you can plan and plan effectively, and that's what our talk today has been about, like planning ahead and doing all this preparation. But a lot of the times, you can have the perfect plan and you can prepare very well, and still it doesn't go accordingly. And that has happened to all of us, I believe. What I generally do when I am stuck somewhere is I would go back to my set of references or then search for new ones. Like, for instance, in The Alchemist itself, there were points when stages when I was not happy with the design of the interior at all. So you have no idea how many times I went back and did more and more reference searching, showed it to more people, getting feedback, getting other people's eyes on it, and getting feedback has always helped. And then, like I mentioned in the talk itself, like going back and forth, changing your medium, shifting between 2D and 3D, always really helps me get a fresh perspective. And like until I'm completely satisfied with the result, I think I would keep reiterating. And one thing I always tell everyone, I always tell myself as well, is that I don't move on to details or color unless I'm happy with the design. And like if there's a painting and if it's not working on a very rough design stage level, then I would not bother to take it further because it's not going to work anyway. And I think zooming out and viewing it as a tiny thumbnail always has helped me in that process. Um,
That reminds
yeah,
me of when artists like flip the canvas to see if it works.
yeah,
I never do
similar.
that because it
I
always looks like
know.
crap.
I know you don't do that, but I'm so
You should
obsessed with
though. You
doing
should.
that.
Yes.
I'm very obsessed with doing that. Like I can't stop. I can't stop.
Yeah. We got some more questions coming in.
Yeah, we do. So the next one is there a tool or program that you've used and accidentally or with intent discovered a better usage for it than its original use? If so, what was it?
For me, this is not going to be so much with characters, but actually, yeah, characters. Here we go. So for graphic design, because I did a lot of that when in my board game days, there's this feature in Photoshop, smart linking, smart objects, so you can like refer to another Photoshop file or whatever, and it's this great non-destructive way of messing with something. When I would be working on an image that was too big, because I found that sometimes just because I was doing stuff for print, it would really bog down my computer. And if you have too many groups and stuff in Photoshop, that can really slow it down. So what I would do is I would paint like I'd sketch out the composition, then I would take one character out, and then I would just smart link it back into the full composition. So that way, anytime I need to make a change on that character, I would go do it in this other file, adjust it, and the smart linking would just update it in the main composition. And that kept it from getting like uh, too slow. So yeah, that was one handy way I found with the smart linking thing. Gargi, anything come to mind?
Well, the only thing that I can think of is the one that I've recently discovered and I'm completely crazy about, which is something we've already mentioned in the talk itself. It's the camera raw filter. I cannot stress on the importance of this enough, but there's just so much, like the more I invest time in using the camera raw filter, the more I discover. Just in Photoshop itself, there are so many default tools that you can use that can make things better. The other thing that I've recently been using a lot in Photoshop, I guess, would be the object selection tool. That has been
Yeah.
very handy and very quick because especially when photo batching, one of the things that you're doing a lot is cutting out selections from images. So that's been really helpful. The next one is kind of a stupid
That's not the next
question.
one. We'll get.
Sorry. Yeah.
I
The
mean, you
next one
could
is
go with
from
that one,
Adele.
but yeah, Adele. She's got the most. Or they have the most
Yes.
likes. It's weird because the
Right.
like system moves things around on
Yeah,
us.
I guess. Yeah. So the next one would be from Adele. Hey, Adele, thank you for coming to the talk. Sometimes the issue of a blank canvas can stem from being afraid of making mistakes. What would you advise for artists with the fear of failure, Stephen?
Um, yeah, it's interesting if you look at all the gifts that I showed are very tailored because the actual beginning steps of my process, it all looks very terrible. And like my sketching is awful, so I don't often show that. And I just accept that it will be crap for and kind of look like I'm failing and I feel like I'm failing up until the last 10%. And it's kind of that thing where I've done it enough times now where I know the process, right? I know I'm going to hate it and then I'm going to be happy and proud of it at the end. And I just accept that throughout that process, this is how I'm going to feel. I'm not saying that as some super inspirational way of going about it, but that is how I go about it. It's just I accept that I'm going to feel this way for this amount of the painting, and then I'll figure it out. It'll come together in the end because again, I have a process. I know that it works, even if it feels like it's failing. As long as I stick to it, it does work out. And sometimes I just tell myself to shut up and stop thinking and just do it. I just go through the process. How about you, Gargi?
Yeah. Completely agree on that. Like the artist's anxiety and fear of failure is such a big thing. And I have had that. There was a time when I used to struggle with it quite a bit. But what I have discovered and understood through the years is that the more workflows you try out and the more you stick to these workflows and then become the master of your own workflow, basically the more you keep doing it and sticking to these processes, as you said, Stephen, the better you get at not falling into the trap, or into the curse of the blank canvas, basically. um
Oh, callback.
Call
That's the name of this talk.
back. Yes.
Yeah.
That was what the trainer suggested we do. In any case, coming back. But yeah, that definitely has helped me. Of course, there are times, when I'm doing something incredibly complicated and I'm just really very afraid that it's not going to work, especially if it's going sideways. But I remember my fundamentals at that time. I remember my research, and sometimes it's really good also to just take a break, like remove yourself from that situation, go take a walk, have a sip of coffee, play some music, write a poem. These are the things that I usually do: coffee, poem, music. And then
Yeah.
I'll come back to it with like a fresh mind, and I'll sit down, I'll go back to my references, I'll always try to solve the problem at the core. And then another good thing is, if you loosen up, if you try not to finish but just solve the problem with like rough sketches or very rough paint overs, that generally also it relaxes you, it takes away the expectation as well. So these are certain things, certain cheats that I sort of fall back upon when something isn't going my way. Yeah.
Yeah.
I hope that answered the question. And we have another one from Marcelo. Kind of a stupid question. No such thing as a stupid
No,
question,
this
but
this is a stupid question. How dare you, Marcelo?
how do you
You
go
should feel bad.
about how do you go
Sorry,
about
Gargi, go for it.
creating straight lines in Photoshop and making it look dynamic and freehand? Stephen?
Um, well, I use a tool called Lazy Nezumi Pro, which is a line straightening tool. And you can adjust the settings to how hard it's going to straighten out that line. And then I just remember from like art school that it's always like, draw with your elbow, not your wrist for a lot of stuff, right? Like big gestures. Um, but who says I know how to draw a straight line? that makes it look dynamic. I don't know. Do I?
You
Gargi,
do.
do
Yeah,
you?
you do. You do. I think you do. And I think it's exactly as you said. Look, honestly, there are some times when the line needs to be very, very, very straight. And that's when I just do hard round and a simple round brush. But if I need it to be dynamic, but still like consistent and freehand as well, then like try to spin from your elbow outwards and you will get the result. It comes with a lot of practice again, but yeah.
All right, we are being told that Gargi's talking too much. So
Yes, as
no, I'm
always.
joking. It's been real and it's been fun and it's been great. And that's a joke because you say real fun. Anyway, I've been a dad for too long. Let's just close this up before I embarrass myself anymore, Gargi. Why don't you say goodbye to everyone for us? It's been a pleasure.
Yes, absolutely. It's been great. Thank you so much, guys, for coming in and listening to the talk. I know that we haven't been able to answer all the questions over here today, but we will reach out to you guys on Dojo and answer any of the unanswered questions here. And feel free to reach out to us by email or Teams. We have our ArtStation links on the presentation, so hope to talk with some of you real soon.
Bye bye.
Bye. Thanks for coming.